Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the first ever Bastion Institute panel. This is the first of many we'll be hosting around the country. Just a quick note, Ambassador Branstad is on his way from the airport. He got stuck with some bad weather. I think half of us will probably get stuck in that tomorrow. So he should be here any minute, and we'll be seated on the left side of the stage. So again, thank you for being here at this first ever event. The Bastion Institute was recently formed in an effort to talk about the need and importance of American engagement and leadership abroad. Too often, discussions around the importance of American strength rarely seeps into our towns and cities across the country and beyond. Major foreign policy decisions and discussions are not related back to the American people, their neighborhoods, their communities, or to their kitchen tables. The Bastion Institute will strive to bridge the gap to discuss why America's strength abroad is now more important than ever before, and why we as Americans truly need to care about it and be involved in it. I hope you'll enjoy this evening. We're joined by Taryn Frieders, who is our moderator, and she's going to take it from here, but thank you for being here, and of course, thank you to our panelists.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again to everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. Since our panelists are so well known to everybody, I thought I'd just dispense with the normal review of their bios. But I did want to make a couple observations about them collectively and about this evening tonight.
Good evening.
Governor.
Nice.
So obviously, I have my phone up here because of the late breaking updates we may or may not get on what's going on in Ukraine. So obviously a very timely event that we're having this evening. In addition, when I was reviewing their bios, I realized tonight you're going to hear from the first ever director of the CIA and Secretary of State.
Thank you all.
The first female combat veteran in the United States Senate. And the longest serving governor in American history. This is quite a collection of patriots that we have up here tonight. And I also just wanted to point out, I mentioned some of their most well-known points in their career, but in addition, I think they just bring a wealth of experience. Secretary Pompeo was also served in Congress. Senator Ernst, had a military career and also served in state government. And Governor Branstad obviously was governor, but also ambassador. So tonight you're going to hear from people with just a wealth of knowledge and experience in national security and foreign policy, which is really, really a treat for all of us here tonight. And lastly, on a personal note, you're going to hear from two of my former bosses and the predecessor of my current boss. So hoping this goes well for all of us tonight. So I think I'll start, obviously, with Russia and what's going on in Ukraine. And I think I'll first just open it up to all of our panelists here tonight. What's going on, and why now? Maybe Secretary Pompeo, we'll start with you.
Sure, Taryn, I'm happy to start. First of all, thank you, Ambassador, Senator. It's great to be with you all. It's great to be back in Iowa as well. Whenever I'm introduced as the 70th Secretary of State, I remind myself that President Trump was the 45th president, so there was a lot more turnover in my gig, than his. So I checked my Twitter account every morning. I still had a job. It was all good. So look, what you're seeing happening in Ukraine today is a function of a couple things, not the least of which is failed American leadership. What do I mean by that? I've been asked 50 times in the last week, would this have happened if you were still the Secretary of State and President Trump was still the president? I obviously can't prove that it didn't happen. I can tell you this much. Vladimir Putin didn't change. He's the same guy. He's evil. He's an autocrat. He's wanted to recreate this notion of the greater Russia or the Soviet Union for a long time. What changed was America's failure to demonstrate resolve and American weakness. And that's really unfortunate for the Ukrainian people. And sadly, this will, and I know we'll talk about this, and what the Bastion Institute is about is, this will matter to us here at home as well. I've heard lots of folks say, why do we care about Ukraine? We'll spend a lot of time talking about it, but this will cause fertilizer to be more expensive for the farmers in Iowa. It will cause gasoline to be more expensive for the people all across America. This has real ramifications for each of us here at home. Peace and stability, the capacity to trade in the world matters. And when you let a bad guy roll around Europe, it doesn't bode well for anyone, certainly those of us here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I can add on to that too, as well, I think if you've watched the stock markets as well, it is impacting those folks that are retirement age or those that are existing on retirement. And it's instability. It's that instability in Europe, and it does have that ripple effect even across the ocean for us right here at home. And when you see instability in places like Europe, that just means that there is greater risk to our citizens right here in the homeland. So having a stable Europe equates to having safety and security here at home.
Senator Ernst, in response to the quote, beginning of the Russian invasion, which is what the Biden administration first referred to it as, in Ukraine, the Biden administration announced yesterday what they're calling the first tranche of sanctions, and then now finally today, they announced that they're moving forward with sanctions on the company building Nord Stream 2. Do these sanctions meet the moment? What is your impression of what the Biden administration's response has been to date?
Well, so many of us in Congress have agreed months and months and months ago that we needed to really force the issue on sanctions when it came to Russia. We needed to show strength. We needed to show power. That's what President Putin understands. That's the only thing that he really understands. And so even as a Congress, we had agreed months ago, Democrats and Republicans, that cutting off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline through sanctions was the way to go. We agreed on that until President Biden actively started lobbying against stopping the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Then we saw Democrats take a radical change and flip-flop and decided, no, it's okay, we'll let it go, and then we'll put sanctions on after they invade. But by that time, once, as we see right now, once Russia is already in Ukraine, how do you ever get them out? So many of us agreed very early on that we needed to have stiff, strong sanctions against Vladimir Putin, and it could have been in the form of, again, Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We could have kicked them out of the SWIFT banking system. There are so many other levers that we could have used before we got to this point. And yet this administration showed weakness, to the Secretary's point, showed weakness and no resolve, and allowed Vladimir Putin to enter into Ukraine with no pushback.
You just returned from the Munich Security Conference. Can you talk a little bit about what that is for those people in the audience here who aren't familiar with it, and maybe just give us a sense as to what the perspective was of America's role in this and our response in Munich?
Absolutely. So the Munich Security Conference is a gathering of European leaders, both those that are members of various parliaments, those that are elected leaders. President Zelensky actually did show up for a brief period of time to make his plea to the members of this security conference. We have defense leaders, and they come primarily from our NATO allies, but there are a number of other countries that are represented there as well. A number of our Balkan friends, such as the Kosovars, were at the conference, a number of others that are asking America to step up. The overview of the conference really did focus on America's role and where we should be as leaders when it comes to our NATO allies, where it comes to really showing strength against another world near-peer adversary, Russia. And so many of them were just begging. I mean, it really came down to begging America to do more. And those pleas have just fallen on deaf ears with this administration. And it is really unfortunate because they saw the fall of Afghanistan last year, and they saw America very weak and insecure. And I think that that has hastened on some of these actions with Russia. He sees America as weak and insecure, and he is now able to take advantage of that position. So again, our NATO friends are asking us to step up. Does that mean sending troops in? No, it doesn't. But what it does mean is providing more lethal aid to the Ukrainian people, using some of those sanctions heavily against Vladimir Putin, and specifically against him and all of the banks, the primary banks within Russia. So there's a lot that we can do without sending troops into Ukraine. That's not where we want to go. But certainly all of the options that we had on the table for this administration, President Biden chose not to take.
Secretary Pompeo, can you talk a little bit more about how NATO should respond and maybe what the long-term implications for NATO might be?
Well, this challenge from Russia is NATO's primary reason for existence as it was created. And this challenge presented by Vladimir Putin is in first instance a European challenge. It's their backyard. It is theirs to take. I'll never forget, I've spent a fair amount of time with Vladimir Putin and his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, and I know their intelligence chief, a fellow named Narishkin. I don't know if anybody saw the little conversation between he and Putin the other day. It was absolutely fascinating. Europe needs to do the right thing to defend itself. I was sitting with President Trump when we spoke to them about the need for them to put their young boys and girls at risk before ours, for them to put their dollars to secure their freedom before ours, but to make clear to them when they did that, that we had a vested interest in it, that we were going to be there as a good partner, but they had to do more to secure their own space. And Putin knows this too. He knows there's a fracture inside of Europe as between the more Western countries, the bigger ones, France and Germany, and the Eastern countries, smaller often. And he's trying to fracture that. I hope that this invasion by Vladimir Putin will cause each European country, NATO members and those European countries that aren't NATO members, to undertake a serious effort, build up their security apparatus, their intelligence apparatus, their military, their economic power, in a way that can prevent and preclude something like this from ever happening again or ever happening to their country as well. They need to take and put their heavy oar in the water, and that's the point in time when the United States can have a proper role.
Absolutely. We're going to move on to China. With Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Branstad's leadership, the Trump administration developed a more realistic approach to China, naming China a strategic competitor and dispensing with the false hopes of prior administrations that China would eventually become a quote-unquote responsible stakeholder if we just let them into international institutions. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it took a long time, I think, for Americans in foreign policy leadership positions to recognize that. Can you talk a little bit about what prompted the change in perspective during the Trump administration?
Sure, Terry, you want to go first? Or I'm happy to take it.
Well, I'll be glad to go first. Many of us were very hopeful that when the Chinese began to get economic freedom, that they would eventually get political freedom. And we thought that Xi Jinping might be a reformer like Deng Xiaoping or like his father. And it's turned out to be just the opposite. I think both the Chinese and the Russians really only respect strength. And that's critically important. And I had the honor of working with Secretary Pompeo and with President Trump, and we did demonstrate strength, and we insisted on fairness and reciprocity in the relationship. The Chinese, they want to have all these dialogues, but they don't really want anything to come of it. And Secretary Pompeo said, we don't want these endless discussions. We want results. And I want to also give Lighthizer and Mnuchin some credit. Lighthizer in particular really focused on getting the trade agreement. And we got the phase 1 trade agreement. We did get the Chinese to make all of fentanyl a controlled substance. So we did make some progress. But I could tell you that it was the tariffs that got their attention. And that eventually got to the point where we were able to get this phase 1 trade agreement. It's not perfect, but it's the best we've made with China, you know, they made a lot of false promises and then never delivered until the Trump administration insisted, we're not going to have these endless dialogues anymore. We're going to focus on fairness and reciprocity. And Secretary Pompeo played a key role in that. Also, I want to say that I watched Fox and Friends this morning, and Senator Ernst did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll pay you later. Thank you.
Ambassador, what do you think the Chinese are thinking right now as they're watching the Biden administration respond to the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
They only respect strength. So what happened in Afghanistan was a debacle, and that showed weakness. As you know, Putin went to the Olympics, and they issued a joint statement, he and Xi Jinping. That's a pretty scary thing, I believe. And, you know, Russia and China, they may be neighbors, but they have not always gotten along. But right now, they kind of have a marriage of convenience. And my concern is that they're going to be watching very closely what happens and how America leads the response of NATO and the other European nations.
Chairman, may I add to that for a second? I want to talk about why this matters to you all. The Chinese Communist Party presents the most singular external threat to the United States of any foreign actor today. There's no doubt about that in my mind. They impact you right here at home. I didn't do the math before I came here, but they have an enormous impact at your major universities. They provide research dollars, and there are many, many Chinese students studying there. They've stolen intellectual property from this state that has destroyed millions of Iowa jobs. Had to close the Houston consulate. The Chinese representatives in Houston, Texas, they're diplomats because they were running the largest spy ring that I'm aware of ever in the history of the United States of America right here on our homeland. This is not a problem that is some far place away. What happens in Beijing, sadly, does not stay in Beijing. Their intentions are global, they are hegemonic. They want to fundamentally rewrite the shape of how the world works, whether it's through their Belt and Road Initiative or by foisting a virus on the world that's now killed several million people. They had sick people, they were highly contagious, they knew them to be lethal, and they put thousands of them on airplanes to Milan, Italy, and across the world. These are not people who respect human life in the way each and every one of you that's here tonight do. This is different in kind. This is not far off. This is here. The Chinese Communist Party is inside the gates. Ambassador Branstad had it right. The response needs to be serious. It needs to demand that we be treated reciprocally and fairly by the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese leadership. We can do this. They are not 10 feet tall. They are not invincible. It's not inevitable that our decline, which is what Xi Jinping talked about when Secretary Blinken met with him in Anchorage, right? He lectured Secretary Blinken, my counterpart, former counterpart, Wang Zhixie, lectured Secretary Blinken about Black Lives Matter and about American decline. Someone asked me what I would have done, and I said, well, I would have flipped the table over, for goodness sake. My son said, yeah, I think that's what my dad would have done. The truth is, we can lead through this problem. Ambassador Branstad hit it on the head. They respect strength. When we demand reciprocity, they will be forced to provide that to us. But if we turn the other cheek, as American foreign policy did for 40 years, but Republicans and Democrats alike, this was your question about changing course. For 40 years, American policy was sell more stuff, buy more stuff, they'll be good. I wish that it were so. I pray that it's so tomorrow. But in the meantime, we've got to do the things that protect each and every one of you. And we were determined to do that. And I had a fantastic ambassador to help President Trump and I lead that mission on your behalf.
Mm-hmm. Senator Ernst, I want to talk a little bit more about China's role in COVID. China's COVID cover-up, as Secretary Pompeo mentioned, has contributed to hundreds of thousands of deaths across the United States, and the Biden administration has failed to acknowledge this and hold China accountable. How are Republicans in Congress trying to address this, trying to promote transparency, and what are the long-term implications if China gets away with this?
Yeah, thank you, Taryn. I have been leading a number of efforts on trying to discover the origins of COVID, and this is where we would typically expect the WHO to step in and force the Chinese to open their laboratories, to disclose documents, and all of the experimentation that has been done. And that has not happened. So I did have the unique opportunity while I was at the Munich Security Conference to actually sit down with some of the leadership from the WHO. So I did ask them,
Bless
where
you.
are you? Yes, I know. At first I was like, do I take this meeting? And then I was like, absolutely, I take this meeting. So I asked them, where are we on discovering this? Because to stop any future pandemic, we have to understand how this one started. And they were as forthright as you would expect maybe at this type of conference. And they said that the Chinese will not allow the WHO to go into their laboratories. They will not share any of the experimentation or documents to the experimentation. So what can we do? We have an organization that probably through its own mechanisms has created stumbling blocks along the way. The Chinese obviously are not going to be helpful in any sort of regard. So what can we do? What can we do as Americans? What can we do as Congress? And that is to make sure that, one, we are not funding any sort of activities that are going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And through some of the investigations that we had done in our office and with other partners on the outside, we were able to see that, yes, there were dollars that were flowing through our NIH out through the form of grants to China and funding experimentation at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So we need to stop that. And President Trump actually did stop dollars going to the Wuhan lab. So that's one thing that we can do. And just simply making sure that there are repercussions to anything that the Chinese are doing that is nefarious and directed towards us. But again, going back to the beginning, we've got to understand how this happened. And I don't know that we will ever have the answers that we are seeking because China just will not be forthcoming.
Ambassador.
We all know this started in Wuhan, China. I was there. I was the ambassador at the time. The Chinese were telling us, oh, we've got everything under control, no problem. And they were lying to their own leaders as well as to us. Why? Because the way the Chinese communist system works, if something bad happens on your watch, you're gone. You're either dead or in jail or whatever. And so the people in Wuhan, the leaders of Wuhan and Hubei province, they lied as long as they could get by with it. And in the meantime, they had this big Chinese New Year celebration, and then they went all over the world and made it a worldwide pandemic. Now, once Xi Jinping and the leaders in Beijing found out about it, they sent in the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, and they just locked everything down and whatever. But this is the problem with their system. And not just here with this, but with other things as well. If something bad happens on your watch at the local level, you, the mayor, the party leader, you're gone. And that's, I think, a really weakness in that communist system. But that's the way it is, and that's, I think, why this became a worldwide pandemic.
And Ambassador, not only will the Chinese go to great lengths within their own country, but the WHO is an example of an international institution that they'll, attempt to capture and frankly have. Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Branstad, China in recent years has increasingly attempted to capture or sway international institutions. There are a number of examples of international elections that they've engaged in fraudulent behavior. How should Americans think about our participation in some of these international institutions that have been corrupted by Chinese influence? And how do we continue to show leadership on the international stage, but at the same time acknowledge when these institutions like the WHO have fallen short?
Well, we have to get over our naivety because we, for many decades, have assumed their good intentions. But that's not the case. And of course, this is what happened with the WHO. They basically were able to intimidate them and prevent them from coming in. We, by the way, we had people from the CDC at the embassy. We're calling them every day and offering to help. Wouldn't return our phone calls. And this is what happens whenever you have a crisis in China. They all clam up and don't say anything until it's all cleared by the leadership. Then they all say the same thing.
I think that's true. I have a slightly less charitable view. I watched the corruption in these institutions. That we were the largest benefactor. The World Health Organization is a good example. The United States was the largest donor to it. In the end, we tried multiple times to reform it, pass through reforms, new rules, new regulations, require a country that has a contagious virus that might be lethal to actually report what they did. China said, you bet, we'll sign up for that, not once, not twice, but 3 times. There are those who think, including the Biden administration, that we ought to continue to try and reform it. We said, that's just nuts. We're going to stop spending any American money there. And we're going to go try the noble objective to keep people safe and healthy across the world. We ought to continue to engage in when a virus breaks out somewhere, there's a pandemic, it's bad, it may ultimately get here. We ought to do that, but the World Health Organization is fundamentally and irrevocably broken. We're not going to participate. And that was the model that President Trump and our team adopted. I'll give you another example from even more recent that's in your minds, the International Olympic Committee. We sent American kids to compete. And these are, by the way, sign me up for the Olympics. My mother took me to watch Carl Lewis run in LA. I love the Olympics. I'm an aficionado. Summer, winter, it doesn't even, spring Olympics, sign me up. We sent our kids to China and we told them, don't take your phones, take a burner phone, like a drug dealer. We told them, be careful about what you say. Any place else in the world, we tell Americans, say what's on your mind. We want you to, we're a democracy. We want ideas to flourish. Say whatever you like. We told them, no, you shut up when you go to China. And we didn't tell them that the Chinese have almost certainly collected their DNA and will store it in their database forever. This all happened because the International Olympic Committee is a fully owned subsidiary of the Chinese Communist Party. This is something that America shouldn't permit. We should have never put these young, amazing athletes in this position. I'm glad that it sounds like all of them got home, that they behaved under China rule while they were there. These are the kind of things that America should never permit to happen. We're better than that. We should treat our Olympic athletes better than that. And when it comes to reciprocity, as Ambassador was talking about, we should demand that when Chinese athletes came to the United States and there were Olympics, there were a set of rules. We should demand that if we're going to send Americans to China for an Olympics, that they should be treated the same way that our athletes were. We didn't do it, and we suffered for it. Xi Jinping is all the greater, and the glory to him for 3 weeks. And a major American network broadcast this to the entire world. Shame on them.
As you mentioned, luckily, hopefully
I
all
was
of our,
only a little less charitable.
all of our athletes made it home, but talk about a place where Americans haven't all made it home, and that's Afghanistan. In the first year of President Biden's presidency, we've now had to evacuate 2 countries, Ukraine and previously in disastrous fashion, Afghanistan. Senator Ernst, as a veteran of the global war on terror and a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, you've been calling for transparency and accountability following the Biden administration's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan last year. Can you talk about why you think that's so important and what the long-term implications of, we've talked about it a little bit here tonight, but what the long-term implications of the Biden administration's actions might be?
Well, the long-term implications of the debacle, the haphazard withdrawal in Afghanistan, is that America has lost its standing on the world front. And we abandoned Afghanistan and left behind Americans. We left our own countrymen in Afghanistan at the hands of the Taliban and the Haqqani Network and Al-Qaeda and any number of other violent extremist organizations. We left them there. 2 days after the Biden administration, President Biden himself was saying, we will leave no American behind. So the long-term implications of that are that Americans abroad, we have many American citizens living in other countries. They were living in Afghanistan. We have Americans living in Ukraine now that our State Department has given a 1-800 number to call if they need to get out of Ukraine. So the long-term implications, not only damaging to our own citizens, but then also a diminished status in the world. And when we're dealing with people like Putin, Xi Jinping, whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan, they're going to look at us with a different viewpoint now. That America may say one thing, but do another. They're not trustworthy. They're pushovers. We're gonna get our way. Biden through Afghanistan was always touting, no, we're going to leave our embassy open. Then a few days later, the embassy closed. He was warned by his military leaders on the ground that had communicated to our Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that Afghanistan is going to fall, and it is going to fall quickly. And yet, this administration chose to do nothing about it. As we have seen through the investigation that was just released to the press, the investigation discovered that they weren't even permitted as DOD and State Department to do what we call NEO operations, to rehearse those. That's the evacuation of non-combatants. They weren't allowed to do that because it might signal that there's an issue with Afghanistan. And so at the last few days of Afghanistan, we saw this tremendous need to get thousands of people out of Afghanistan and an absolute failure to do so. And so again, our standing in the world is diminished. So not only did we leave those American citizens behind, the SIVs, the special immigrant visa holders, green card holders, people that should have been allowed into the United States, we ended up evacuating about 70% of those 123,000 people that were not even vetted. They were moved to third countries. You know, all of that effort to get out people that really had no connection to the United States. So valiant effort by our men and women in the armed services, but they were evacuating people that probably shouldn't have come out of Afghanistan instead of those that really needed to get out. But beyond that as well, we abandoned our allies and partners in Afghanistan. So what a lot of Americans tend to forget is that America wasn't there alone. We had really great partnerships. Many countries that joined with us in the fight against terrorism, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. We pulled out of Afghanistan without letting them know we were going. We left our allies in a lurch. So do you think that they will trust us in the future?
One of the things that I think was really a total disaster, and just about anybody that thinks about it would know you wouldn't do this, abandoning that air base. Yeah. And that air base, they also, was there 5,000 prisoners there? Mm-hmm. And I think the people that killed our soldiers and the Afghan citizens, I think were prisoners that were let out of that facility. And that's how, you don't take the military out before the civilians. That's pretty, you know, I was just a buck sergeant in the Army. And I even know that.
Sharon, may I say,
Done very well.
Heck of a deal for a buck sergeant, exactly. May I say just two quick points. First is I want to share with each of you something that's very personal. You all will have friends that served in Afghanistan. You'll have family members that served there. They're pretty down. 13 Americans killed. We had the debacle that you've just heard the ambassador and the senator describe. A lot of them are asking themselves, was it worth it? Why was I there? This was 20 years on. We spent lots of money. We had lots of people killed, including many of my friends who I went to school with at West Point. From the former Secretary of State, from the bottom of his heart, tell them that we love them and their service was noble and important. As CIA director, I saw it. Those Marines, those Air Force soldiers and sailors alike saved American lives. They took down terror plots from there for 20 years. There may well be people in this room that are alive today because of the work that they did. Please, please tell them that the Secretary of State told them that their service was important to the United States of America, and they should not feel sad or neglected. They should worry about the way we departed, but they should know that their moment in service in Afghanistan was deeply worthy, and I am proud of them, and I want to thank them, and I love them. Last point, I negotiated with the Taliban. You should know that wasn't going to happen. These are bad guys. We knew that. We were trying to take the temperature down. We were trying to find the way. Anybody guess what President Trump wanted to do in Afghanistan? Go check his Twitter account, right? He wanted out. I wanted out. We all wanted our boys and girls to come back home, but we knew we had to do so in a way that respected the very history that I just described. And we tried. I can't tell you how many times I would come into the Oval Office of the President and say, Mike, we're not out yet. Yes, sir, we're not out yet. We're working our way there. And we would remind him, and he knew we had to do this in a way that was respectful and dignified and protected America from ever being attacked from that place again as well. And so we were able to do really well. We got from about 15,000 U.S. forces on the ground in Afghanistan to about 2,500. We did not get all the way out, it's true. We never found the conditions right. And there's the difference. This is what you spoke to, Senator. We knew you had to have the conditions right. Before we could do that, we had to make sure that we got our equipment out, that we got every American out, that we preserved our capability to prevent a terror attack from that place from hitting us here at home. Again, this is what the Bastion Institute is about, right? It's talking about the things abroad that matter here at home. You had to do that right. It took real American leadership to say, okay, we're going to do this methodically. President Biden came in and ripped up the plan that we had laid out. And he set a date certain. He set a very political date. Originally, he said September 11th, we're all going to be out. No one needs to guess why he picked that day. And the result is 13 Americans that did not come home to their families. And to Senator Ernst and the ambassador's point, a diminished America in the face of our friends in the world and our adversaries saying, I don't think America is serious anymore about the things they tell the world they care about. That will not benefit us here in Kansas or in Iowa or any place else.
The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan was certainly horrifying to watch, but another thing that's been really difficult to follow has been the Biden administration's reversal of the Trump administration's policy on Iran. Secretary Pompeo,
You're killing me.
I'm going to go to you first.
All right.
Can you explain the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran and why what the Biden administration is doing now is so dangerous?
I thought you were going to ask me to explain what the Biden administration was going to do. I was going to ask for a cocktail.
It's a harder question.
Ask for a cocktail. This is really straightforward. We knew three things about the Middle East. This was different, too, than previous policy. Before Secretaries of State traveled from Palestine to Jerusalem and just negotiated lines on the map, we knew three things, three central things. One, Israel was our friend, the lone democracy, and the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. And we could have a real good security partner there, and it was right and moral to defend them. President moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. We said the Golan Heights belong to Israel, and then I made a statement that corrected 70 years of failed policy that said, essentially, Israel is not an occupying nation. There's part one. Second piece was Iran was the troublemaker. I would brief the president almost every day, and he would say, Mike, how come every time you talk about trouble, you tell me it's the Iranians? I would tell him because it is. Whether it's Hezbollah attacking from Lebanon, whether it's Hamas attacking from the Gaza Strip, whether it's the Houthis attacking from Yemen, it's Iranian-backed terrorism roiling the Middle East. And so we wanted to punish the Iranian regime and try and isolate them. A key piece of this was making friends with Arab states and convincing them to make friendships with Israel as well. It ultimately resulted in the Abraham Accords. Good work by Secretary Mnuchin, Jared Kushner, our ambassador there, Ambassador Friedman. This was an all-hands effort. We got great support from Capitol Hill as well. delivering 4 peace agreements with the state of Israel. It was truly historic and important. And I think will last. I don't think the Biden administration can actually undo this because the people in those countries see that they are better off as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we wanted to punish the regime for their terror, and we wanted to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. Part of that was withdrawing from the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal gave the Iranians a certainty, a clear path to a nuclear weapon. We wanted to do the one thing we knew that would prevent them for as long as possible from getting one, which is to take the money away from them. So we couldn't find the pallets of cash, but we did the next best thing. We cut them off from the global trading system. We had them trading fewer than 300,000 or 400,000 barrels of oil a day in the world. And they were on about their last legs when the Biden administration came in and rescued the Ayatollah. I'll never forget the effort that our officers made at the State Department to bring Americans home who were being held hostage there. We brought home several. And we also, when Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian general, was threatening more Americans, was preparing to attack even more than he had already killed, President Trump took the bold action to strike Qasem Soleimani. He will never kill another American. They're about to undo that this week. It looks like they're on the cusp of signing a deal that's even shorter and weaker. I pray for the state of Israel, who will have a very difficult decision to make if Iran is able to proceed down its path towards a nuclear weapon. They can't live with an Iran with a nuclear weapon, but it is a really tough thing when you're not sure that America will have your back.
Absolutely. And I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the best thing that could occur with President Trump and the Iran situation with that joint agreement was to withdraw. Absolutely, it was the right thing. As the secretary said, it was a 10-year window of opportunity for the Iranians to develop a nuclear weapon. So what we see, President Biden is negotiating a new agreement. However, in 2015, there was a bipartisan act that went into effect. It was signed into law, the Iranian Nuclear Agreement Act. And this was put into place, which would force any future president to bring an agreement back to Congress for approval by Congress. So everything that President Biden is doing up to this point in negotiating a new agreement is illegal. It has to come to Congress by an act of law that was passed in 2015. So if he tries to sign a new agreement with the Iranians, he will have to answer to Congress. That will be null and void. It has to come back to Congress. And I guarantee it is not something that I will be supportive of.
Lastly, in the time that we have tonight, I kind of wanted to bring it back to what Huff talked about earlier, which is the core of the Bastion Institute, and that's to really to connect what these folks do in their jobs every day with the issues that face American people, and to really ensure that foreign policy is rooted here at home. In the wake of President Trump's America First foreign policy, the Biden administration has said it's pursuing a foreign policy for the middle class, which to me is an implicit acknowledgement of the importance of connecting foreign policy to Americans' daily lives. As policymakers at the highest levels of foreign policy and national security, how did you all in your jobs, did you think about connecting your work to your fellow Americans? And for those of us sitting here tonight in the audience, what can we do to stay engaged?
Joe, you want to go first?
Want to go to me on this?
Sure.
Well, first of all, I think absolutely we need to focus on what's best for America. If we don't, nobody else will. And, for too long, we have been, we've been there for everybody else and not ourselves. It's just like what we've got with the southern border now. We've got to protect the jobs, the safety, the well-being, the education of the people of our country. This is a great country. I'm just a poor farm kid from northern Iowa, and I've had the American dream. Be able to serve the people of Iowa, to represent our nation with our biggest, I guess our biggest adversary in the world, our biggest challenger in China. But my concern is that we have got to get, and I think President Trump had this right when he said, we need to have an America First agenda because it focuses on our people who've been ignored too long. And here's what I saw in the state of Iowa. Working people who, many of them union people that have never voted Republican, have all of a sudden become supporters of Republican candidates, not just Trump, but candidates for Congress, for the state legislature, because they feel the Democratic Party has abandoned them. That they don't care about the working people anymore. That Trump was able to do something that I never seen before. He was able to build a coalition with working people, and I went to these rallies, and I never recognized a lot of those people. They're not people that normally came to Republican events. And my son told me, well, we're going to have a rally here, and it's going to compete with the Iowa-Penn State football game, and we're going to get 25,000 people. Well, my wife and I were we were on vacation in Croatia, so I wasn't there, but I think they had more than 25,000 people. And I think that's because all of a sudden, people have come to the realization that it's not just the elites or the media or Hollywood that calls the shots, but this is still a country that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I think the people are beginning to say, we want people that represent us, that understand what America is all about. We have this long and proud tradition in history, and it's something that we need to renew and restore.
Absolutely.
Senator Graham. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go a step further as well, because we have been in the tradition of America First. And that was something that the last administration under President Trump really fostered. But I don't believe it should be America alone. I don't think they are separate of one another. So America should always be first. We are Americans. America comes first. But we need to engage around the globe. And I think that's the point of the Bastion Institute as well, is to know that we do have standing around the world and that we are all interconnected through economics and trade. We do engage in various partnerships around the world, and that's a good thing. We should be able to do that, but we should lead with strength so that we're not taken advantage of by countries that we consider our near-peer adversaries. So whether it is Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, that they know we are going to be strong and we will push back when necessary. We have interests all around the globe, and we talked about the Chinese. Well, there is a Belt and Road Initiative around the world. I was in Panama not all that long ago, looking at our trade activities and what goes on through the Panama Canal. Both ends of the canal are owned by the Chinese. That's dangerous, folks. So we need to be able to engage where necessary and push back against Chinese influence and make sure that we're able to do our trade and move our goods, our exports, our imports without being hampered by an adversary. So America first, but never America alone. One thing that we are charged with, of course, through our Constitution is our national defense. And I think that that is important, that we always remember, first and foremost, we need to protect America. But we can do that through so many other levers, through the State Department, It doesn't necessarily have to be through the blood of our men and women in uniform. So we need to engage more in those areas and be less reliant upon the blunt force power of our military. We will use it if necessary, but just like in this administration, we've seen so many lost opportunities to engage those levers that the Biden administration has chosen not to pull.
Let me, Taryn, maybe close this question. You asked about what the folks here can do. I'm headed to Taiwan next week. Be wonderful to be with the people of Taiwan and demonstrate American resolve. It's also really important because Iowa sells stuff there. So to Kansas. Right? We have important commercial trading partners. What are the things you can do? There was no tool in my kit bag when I was negotiating with someone, whether they were an ally, a friend, a partner, someone who wasn't sure about us. There was nothing like American power that comes from our economy, and American power comes from the rooting that we have in our Constitution, our central founding. I would land on this beautiful white over blue airplane that you all provided for me. Thank you. I'm back in the middle seat on Delta now. But did it for 50 years. Hopefully I'll do it for another 50. They wanted to meet with me. They didn't want to meet with Mike. They wanted to meet with America's Secretary of State because of you. Because the things you do, that you take care of your families, you go to church, you are faithful, you do all of these things. This provides enormous American power across the world. These people from their country want to come here because of the things you all do. You came out on a Wednesday night to listen to the three of us talk about America's place in the world and what that means for you here and for your families and for your faith communities. Stay hard at it. Stay engaged. Read the Washington Post and the New York Times a little bit less. And spend a little more time with your grandkids. These are the things that will really provide the next Secretary of State with the capacity to deliver an America First set of policies around the world and keep us safe and secure and ensure that for another 250 years, we'll have a singularly great nation, one that's the greatest nation in the history of civilization. I'm counting on you. This is where it will happen. It's not going to happen in Washington. It's going to happen in places like we're at tonight. When you do that, when you stay focused on the things that matter most, teaching our kids the right things in schools, making sure that we prosecute crime, when we do the right things here at home, you'll give the 72nd or the 73rd or the 74th Secretary of State the capacity to negotiate in a way that delivers really good outcomes for us all across America. I want to just say thank you all for taking time on a Wednesday to come out here and be with us.
Absolutely. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Yeah.